Hey everyone, I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. I pulled into the driveway at dusk, the familiar outline of our house stark against the evening sky. For a moment, I sat there staring at the windows lit up with a soft yellow glow. Everything looked normal. Our home, the place where I'd shared 1,000 mundane and intimate moments with Lisa. But something didn't feel right. A nagging itch at the back of my mind. I dismissed it, chalking it up to the exhaustion of a long business trip. As I walked through the front door, I immediately sensed it. An almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere, like a subtle wrong note in a familiar song. My suitcase landed with a thud in the hallway. "Lisa?" I called out, but there was no reply. The house was quiet, too quiet. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom. The scent hit me before I even reached the door, a cloying mix of sweat and something else, something off. It lingered in the air, curling around my senses. I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob, heart pounding hard enough to drown out the silence. I turned the knob slowly, easing the door open. The sheets were twisted, half off the bed, the pillows scattered haphazardly. On the nightstand, an empty wine glass teetered on the edge. And then I saw it. An earring, small, delicate, with a single diamond glinting under the soft bedroom light. Lisa didn't wear earrings like that. I knew every piece of jewelry she owned. This wasn't one of them. My mouth went dry as I reached out and picked it up. The metal was still warm to the touch, as if it had been worn recently. A chill ran down my spine. I set the earring back down carefully, like it was some fragile evidence that would shatter if I handled it too roughly. My gaze swept the room again, taking in every detail. The bed sheets, our bed sheets, were stained, wrinkled in a way that told me everything I didn't want to believe. My mind rebelled against the thoughts forming, trying to convince me it was just a messy bed, an earring lost by a friend. But the scent, it was unmistakable, seeping into every corner of my mind, poisoning my thoughts. I backed out of the room, closing the door as if shutting away the vile reality that awaited behind it. A bitter taste filled my mouth. I made my way downstairs and poured myself a drink. The bourbon burned as it went down, but it wasn't enough to numb the confusion, the dawning suspicion twisting in my gut. The following days were a blur of disjointed conversations and Lisa's strained smiles. She was distant, her laughter hollow. Every time her phone buzzed, she seemed on edge. A few times I caught her staring off into space, a strange expression on her face, something between guilt and relief. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off, claiming work stress. "Just a project deadline," she'd say with a dismissive wave, her eyes sliding away from mine. But it wasn't just stress. I knew that now. I had started to notice the patterns, the sudden late nights out with friends I'd never heard of, the hastily explained absences. And then there was the way she touched me, fleeting and cold, as if it took effort to even pretend. The earring haunted me, a constant reminder that everything I thought I knew was crumbling. I'd left it on the nightstand, curious to see if she'd mention it, if she'd realize I'd found it. But days passed, and she never said a word. It just sat there, sparkling mockingly, a silent testament to my growing paranoia. One night I stayed up late, pretending to be engrossed in some mindless TV show while Lisa hovered in the kitchen, her phone glued to her hand. I watched from the corner of my eye as she typed furiously, her face lit up with a smile I hadn't seen in months. Something inside me snapped. My heart hammered against my ribs as I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my voice steady. "I'm thinking of taking another trip," I said casually, as if I hadn't just watched her light up like a teenager texting her first crush. Her head jerked up, eyes wide with surprise. "Another one? So soon?" The words tumbled out too fast, too eager. Her expression flickered. Panic, then something else. "Was that anticipation?" Yeah, it's just a short one, Ning, I said, giving her a tight smile. Just a couple of days. She nodded quickly, her relief palpable. I'll miss you, she added, but her gaze was already drifting back to her phone, fingers twitching to resume her conversation. I knew then. She was waiting for me to leave, counting down the hours, maybe even the minutes. Whatever she was hiding, it was something she couldn't indulge in while I was around. My resolve solidified, hardening into something cold and unyielding. I wasn't going anywhere, not really. I just let her think I was. That weekend, I packed a small bag and made a show of kissing her goodbye, lingering at the doorway just long enough to watch the tension leave her shoulders as I stepped outside. I drove a few blocks away, parked, and doubled back on foot, slipping through the shadows until I reached the back of our house. Installing the cameras took longer than I'd expected. My hands trembled as I worked, every fiber of my being screaming at me to stop, to turn around and just leave. But I couldn't. I needed to know. I had to see it for myself, no matter how much it hurt. The tiny devices fit seamlessly into corners and behind picture frames, their lenses capturing everything. Bedroom, living room, kitchen, every space she thought she had to herself. By the time I finished, it was past midnight. I wiped my hands on my jeans, my fingers stained with sweat and dust. I stepped back and surveyed the house, my chest tightening with a mix of dread and determination. This was it. If she was doing something behind my back, I'd have the proof. And if I was wrong, no, I wasn't wrong. I couldn't be. For the next few days, I pretended to be away, calling Lisa from the confines of a cheap motel room a few miles out of town. She kept up the charade beautifully, her voice light and airy, as if she hadn't a care in the world. But I knew better. I sat in that dingy room, staring at the live feeds on my laptop, watching her every move. The first day, nothing happened. She stayed home, cooking dinner and watching TV. The second day, she went out for groceries, chatted with a neighbor. All normal, all perfectly innocent. I started to wonder if I'd gone crazy, if I was letting that damned earring and my own insecurities twist reality. But on the third day, everything changed. It was around noon when she made a call, her voice low and hushed. My pulse raced as I leaned closer, straining to hear. He's out of town, she said softly, a smile in her voice. Yeah, you can come over. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I watched as she moved around the house, straightening pillows, fluffing her hair in the mirror. 15 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I watched, numb, as she opened the door and let a man inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a confident grin. My gym trainer. My breath hitched. And then another man joined, and another. My mind reeled, struggling to process what I was seeing. My own wife, laughing and flirting with three men in our living room, in my home, a knot tightened in my chest, fury blazing through my veins. I should have shut off the feed, looked away. But I couldn't. My eyes stayed glued to the screen, recording every second, every filthy smile and touch. I watched it all, my teeth grinding until my jaw ached. It was worse than I'd imagined. So much worse. I sat there, numb as my wife, Lisa, turned to these men, and my fingers tightened around the laptop until my knuckles went white. I had my proof. Now it was time to decide what to do with it. Each day I sat in that motel room, staring at the screen, watching her movements with the same dull ache of a man tracing a finger along an open wound. I forced myself to analyze it clinically. Every smile, every shift in her posture, every word she spoke, piecing together a pattern that screamed of deceit. The thing is, I could see it now. How her body language softened when she thought she was alone. The way she'd sit on the couch, glancing at the door as if waiting for someone. Her gaze darted to her phone every few minutes, a tiny flash of excitement lighting up her face with each buzz of a notification. And then, the fleeting smile that followed, a smile she hadn't given me in months. She'd sink back against the cushions, satisfied, her fingers idly tracing circles on her knee. Just a woman waiting for her lover, or lovers. My chest tightened every time I watched it. I couldn't tear my eyes away. Even when the nausea rose and I found myself doubled over in the bathroom, retching up the bile that seemed permanently lodged in my throat. But I kept watching. I had to. It was the only way to truly understand how far this betrayal went. There was something darkly compelling in knowing the truth, no matter how much it hurt. It was like pressing a bruise, savoring the pain because it was the only thing that reminded you that you were still alive. By the fourth day, I was running on fumes, adrenaline and anger fueling me where sleep should have been. Every new clip she starred in, every flirtatious giggle, every moment she lingered on the threshold of our bedroom door before turning back like a temptress, reconsidering her prey, each scene hammered home just how deeply I'd been played. It was on that same night around 11 when the shadows appeared again. I had the camera feeds pulled up on multiple screens, bedroom, hallway, and living room, watching everything simultaneously. There was a knock on the front door, soft but distinct. Lisa didn't hesitate. She rushed to the door, her hair tousled in a way that looked intentionally casual. She opened it just enough to peer out, a coy smile curving her lips. I adjusted the volume, straining to hear. "Everything's clear," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder, confirming she was alone. "Come in." And then they stepped inside. The first man was familiar, with the same cocksure grin and muscular frame of my gym trainer, Brad. He slipped past her, his hand grazing her waist like it belonged there. The second man followed, older, more polished. Lisa's boss. My stomach turned. His eyes roved over her with a predatory hunger that made me clench my fists. And then the third man entered. Someone I didn't recognize. Younger, clean-cut, wearing a tailored suit. Lisa's gaze softened, her expression almost tender as she reached up and kissed him lightly on the lips. I felt something in me snap. They moved to the living room, Lisa gesturing to the couches. I watched, numb, as they sat down, laughing together. Casual, like old friends gathering for drinks. Her smile was radiant, her laughter genuine. She touched each of them in turn, a hand on Brad's knee, fingers brushing the older man's arm, then resting her head briefly on the young man's shoulder. What the hell was this? Some twisted joke? I couldn't understand it. Wasn't one affair enough? "Missed you, baby," Brad murmured, leaning in to kiss her. She didn't resist. His hands roamed possessive, while the other two watched with interest. My skin crawled, my teeth ground together so hard I thought my jaw might shatter. "Be patient," she teased, voice low and sultry. "We have all night." They stayed for hours. They drank, they laughed, and when the drinks were gone, the real show began. I didn't want to watch, but I did. I sat there sickened and mesmerized as the scene unfolded like some grotesque spectacle. They treated her like a prize, my wife, my Lisa, taking turns as if she were a toy they shared. And she reveled in it. Every moan, every gasp, every smile aimed at those men. It felt like a dagger twisting deeper into my chest. She was lost to me, completely and utterly lost. When they finally left, Lisa lingered at the door, watching them drive off before closing it quietly behind her. She stood there, staring at the wood grain, her breath uneven, a tremor in her hands. She bit her lip, as if holding something back, and then laughed, a soft, bitter sound that echoed through the empty house. I replayed that moment a dozen times, trying to decipher it. Was it regret, satisfaction, or something darker? Whatever it was, it didn't matter anymore. The betrayal was complete. There was no going back. I spent the next few days in a haze of rage and purpose. I had the footage. I had every disgusting second of it. But that wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed to understand why she did this, how long it had been going on, and who these men really were. Brad and her boss were easy enough to identify, but the third man, he was a mystery, one I intended to unravel. I hired a private investigator. His name was Charles Riley, an ex-cop with a reputation for getting results. We met at a rundown diner off the highway. He looked exactly like the type, crumpled shirt, a 5 o'clock shadow that screamed neglect, and eyes that had seen far too much of humanity's ugliness. "So, you want me to tell your wife?" he asked, his voice roughened by years of cigarettes and cheap whiskey. "Get dirt on her?" I shook my head. I already have the dirt. I need details. Who these men are, how long it's been going on, and what they're hiding. Charles leaned back, studying me with a look that suggested he'd already pegged me as another husband out for revenge. All right, I'll need the usual. Photos, names, anything you've got. I slid the USB drive across the table. He raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Plugging it into his laptop, he watched a few seconds of the footage, his expression hardening. Christ, he muttered, snapping the laptop shut. This isn't just an affair. This is a goddamn circus. Exactly, I said flatly, and I want to know every act. He nodded slowly, the cynical amusement fading from his eyes. Consider it done. But a job like this, if they're hiding something big, it won't be cheap. I don't care about the cost. I want every detail, and I want it fast. Over the next few days, Charles sent me updates, phone records, emails, addresses. He was thorough, efficient, the way only someone who truly despised their job could be. I followed his reports with the intensity of a man starving for answers. Each new piece of information chipped away at the mystery. Lisa's boss, David Harlan, had a reputation for getting too close to his female employees, but nothing had ever stuck. He was cautious, slimy, but smart. Brad, my gym trainer, had a string of affairs stretching back years. He used his sessions to seduce lonely wives and girlfriends, slipping into their lives like a parasite. But the third man, he was the key. His name was Ethan Collins, a hotshot lawyer with ties to several high-profile clients. No criminal record, no known vices. Clean, professional, untouchable. But why him? Why would a man like that risk his career, his reputation, for Lisa? I dug deeper, combing through every snippet Charles sent me. And then I found it, a single email exchange between Ethan and David. The subject line read, "Compensation Agreement." My heart raced as I read through the message. They were paying her, paying Lisa, monthly deposits, transferred discreetly into an offshore account I hadn't known existed. My stomach clenched. They weren't just having an affair. They'd turned her into something vile, something unspeakable. I leaned back, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just betrayal. It was exploitation. They'd groomed her, manipulated her, turned her into their personal plaything. And she'd let them. She'd welcomed it. I wanted to destroy them all, tear down everything they'd built, expose them for the scum they were. But first, I needed leverage. I needed a plan. With each new revelation, the rage that had once been a searing inferno cooled, hardening into something far more dangerous. Cold, calculating fury. My initial plans for revenge had been crude, hasty. This would be different. I would make them suffer. Ruin them, piece by piece, until they were begging for the mercy I'd never grant. And Lisa, she would watch it all crumble. Then, and only then, would I deal with her. I didn't know what that would look like yet, but I'd find a way. I'd make her pay. They thought they knew control. They'd have no idea what was coming for them. By the time I was done, they'd wish they'd never met me or her. Processing the betrayal was like wading through quicksand. Every step pulled me deeper into a suffocating mire of bitterness and pain. But each thought sharpened my resolve. My emotions teetered between devastation and the cold clarity of calculation. I dissected every memory, every shared moment, searching for signs that I'd missed. It was easy to spiral into self-blame, to wonder where I'd failed as a husband, but I quickly pushed those thoughts aside. This wasn't my failure, it was theirs. Lisa's, for giving herself to these men, Brad's, for abusing my trust, David's, for corrupting what little integrity he had left. And Ethan, whoever he was, he would pay too, for whatever part he'd played. I was done being the man who sat on the sidelines, oblivious. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was an agent of retribution, and I would make them feel every ounce of the humiliation they had dealt me. Sitting at the motel desk, I spread out the files Charles had compiled, surveillance images, financial records, snippets of conversations he'd intercepted. It was like putting together a puzzle, each piece revealing the grotesque shape of their conspiracy. But there was more to it, a deeper ugliness I hadn't anticipated. Ethan's payments to Lisa weren't just for her company. He was compensating her to keep quiet. Something about their exchanges suggested coercion, manipulation. I combed through the records, my pulse pounding. Texts between Ethan and Brad painted a twisted picture of how they'd lured her in. Ethan, always the gentleman, had approached her first, discreet lunches, offers to help with legal advice. But Brad had taken a different approach, exploiting her vulnerabilities, the low points she'd hidden from me. He'd used his sessions with her as leverage, making her think she owed him something. And when she resisted, he'd threatened to expose her private struggles, things I hadn't known about, therapy sessions, medication she'd been taking for anxiety. Son of a bitch, I muttered, shoving back from the desk. My heart hammered as I stared at the files, anger twisting through me like a blade. Was this all it took to break a person? A few kind words, some pressure applied at just the right time? But the anger shifted, edged with something unexpected. Doubt. What if Lisa had been trapped? Not entirely willing, but too scared or ashamed to tell me. What if I was punishing her for being weak instead of evil? I shook my head, pushing that thought away. No, it didn't matter what they'd done to her. She still made a choice. Every smile she gave them, every touch was a choice. She'd betrayed me in the worst possible way, and nothing changed that. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. I couldn't let emotions cloud my judgment. I needed a plan that would tear apart everything they'd built, piece by piece. And for that, I'd need to start at the core. Lisa's perfect family image. Her parents doted on her, always boasting about their daughter's career, her marriage, her life. They didn't know about the rot festering beneath the surface. I'd start by shattering that image. Exposing the affair to her family would be the first step, the crack that would splinter her entire facade. The recordings I had would make them turn on her. No matter how much they loved her, the shame would be too much to bear. The disgust in their eyes would haunt her more than any punishment I could deliver. Her siblings, who had always resented her for being the golden child, would relish the opportunity to kick her when she was down. The thought of it filled me with a dark satisfaction. I typed up an anonymous email attaching the damning footage. Lisa laughing with those men, kissing them, welcoming them into our home. I included no words, no explanations, just the raw, undeniable truth. With a click, I sent it to her parents and siblings, knowing it would detonate like a bomb in their pristine suburban lives. Next, I turned my attention to her job. David Harlan, her boss, had to go down too. I'd found evidence of financial misconduct, unauthorized bonuses, expense reports that didn't add up. I packaged the information neatly alongside the footage of him and Lisa. An anonymous tip to the company's board and HR department would be enough to start a full-blown investigation. He'd lose everything, his job, his reputation, his family once the scandal broke. And Lisa, caught in the crossfire, would be dragged through the mud with him. I wanted her to feel the walls closing in, her world shrinking until there was no escape. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a thought nagging at me. Did I want Lisa to lose her job? To be utterly alone? Would that break her? Or would it just push her further into a corner I couldn't reach? I struggled with the decision for a moment, then resolved to send the email anyway. I was beyond hesitation now. There was no room for mercy. I shifted to the gym next to Brad. He'd been preying on vulnerable women for years, but none of his victims had ever come forward. I needed to make sure that changed. Using the footage and Charles's notes, I compiled a dossier on his affairs, every married woman, every girlfriend he'd seduced and discarded. I sent it to the gym's board, the media, and even posted it anonymously on local forums. The scandal would go public. His clients would drop him, and his career would crumble. He'd be a pariah, shunned by everyone in his social circle. But just as I hit send, my phone buzzed with a new message from Charles. "Ryan, we need to talk. Call me ASAP." I frowned and dialed his number. He picked up on the first ring. "I found something you need to know," he said, his voice tense. "It's about Brad. He's not just cheating on women. He's been using them for more. Blackmail, coercion, and it looks like Lisa might be a victim. I froze, my breath catching. What are you talking about? Brad's got a history of coercing his clients. He gets them in compromising situations and then uses the threat of exposure to control them. Lisa's not the only one, but she's the only one he's still actively manipulating. My hand tightened around the phone. You're telling me she's been blackmailed? That she was forced into this? Maybe not forced, Charles said carefully, but he's definitely got something on her. Something that's keeping her in line. I don't know what, but it's big. I leaned back, my mind racing. Could it be true? Had Lisa been caught in Brad's web of control, unable to escape? It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it changed things. It added a new layer to the betrayal, one that I hadn't anticipated. Look, Ryan, Charles continued, if you go after him, you might be putting Lisa in even more danger. If he's got leverage, he'll use it. You need to think this through. My jaw clenched. I'd been so focused on destroying them that I hadn't considered the collateral damage. But if I back down now, if I let Brad keep that power over her, then I'd be no better than him. I couldn't let him win. No, I said, my voice low. I'm not backing down. I'll find a way to expose him without putting her at risk. Be careful, Charles warned. Guys like him, they don't go down easy. I'm counting on it. After I hung up, I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This new complication changed things, but it didn't change my goal. I just needed to be smarter, more careful. I needed to sever Brad's hold over Lisa before I took him down. I spent hours reviewing every scrap of information I had on him, piecing together a new plan. If I could expose his pattern of abuse, if I could find other victims willing to speak out, it would weaken his position. The gym's board would have no choice but to act. And once he was disgraced, his threats would lose their power. Lisa would be free, but I couldn't stop there. I needed to keep pushing, keep tightening the noose around them all. My focus shifted to Ethan. He was the linchpin, the one holding everything together behind the scenes, the payments, the secrecy. They all traced back to him. If I could get to Ethan, I could unravel the entire operation. I made a few calls, pulling in favors, digging into Ethan's background. His spotless record was a fictional, a carefully constructed lie. Beneath the surface, there were cracks, shady business dealings, off-the-books transactions, ties to people who made a living out of ruining others. He was untouchable for a reason, but no one was truly untouchable. Everyone had a weak spot. I found his, a former associate, someone he'd screwed over in a deal gone wrong. The man had nothing left to lose and plenty to gain from Ethan's downfall. I reached out, offering information in exchange for a favor. He agreed, and within days I had everything I needed. Documents, emails, the kind of evidence that could end Ethan's career and land him in prison. It was time to put it all in motion. I compiled everything: Brad's affairs, David's financial misconduct, Ethan's shady dealings, and sent it to the relevant authorities one by one. I felt a grim satisfaction as I watched the confirmations roll in, each email a step closer to my endgame. And Lisa, she would be at the center of it all. I'd strip away every illusion, every lie, until there was nothing left but the cold, hard truth. When the fallout hit, I'd be there to watch it all burn. I sent the damning evidence of Brad's manipulations to the gym's board, attaching the recordings and documents that laid out his disgusting web of control over his clients. In less than an hour, my phone buzzed with a notification confirming receipt. They'd review the footage, and I knew what would follow: a termination, a scandal, and a public announcement to distance themselves from a predator. That evening, as I refreshed the gym's website, I saw the statement appear. Effective immediately, Bradley Taylor is no longer affiliated with our organization due to allegations of misconduct. The rest was the standard PR jargon, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. His name was already circulating on local news forums, the story spreading like wildfire. A few victims started coming forward, anonymously at first, their voices hesitant but firm. Brad's life unraveled rapidly from there. His social media presence disintegrated under the weight of public outrage. Clients, trainers, even former friends distanced themselves. And still, I stayed in the shadows, watching, savoring each headline. Disgraced trainer accused of manipulating clients. Shocking allegations surface. Brad Taylor's abuse of power. But the fallout was far from over. 2 days later, I received a message from Charles with a link to an article. Local gym trainer under criminal investigation for blackmail and sexual exploitation. My breath caught. The police were involved now. I clicked through, eyes skimming the text, every word a testament to the effectiveness of my plan. Brad had crossed too many lines, and there was no way out. With the additional evidence I provided, they had enough to press charges. I allowed myself a grim smile. The bastard was finally where he belonged, powerless, exposed, and trapped. Still, something gnawed at me. An unfinished thread. Lisa's name hadn't come up in any of the reports, which meant she was still protected by the anonymity of the victims. That would change if Brad decided to turn on her in desperation. He could reveal her involvement, paint her as a willing participant to deflect blame. I needed to ensure that he stayed silent, and there was only one way to do that. I reached out to a lawyer I'd worked with before, a man well-versed in discreet negotiations. He arranged for a meeting with Brad's attorney, where I made my offer clear. If Brad left Lisa's name out of his testimony, if he accepted his fate quietly, I'd make sure certain documents never saw the light of day. Proof of his hidden assets, offshore accounts he'd siphoned money into. His attorney hesitated, but he understood the stakes. Brad wouldn't fight. He'd go down quietly, alone. I hung up the phone, feeling the adrenaline fade. One obstacle down. But as much as I wanted to relish Brad's demise, I couldn't afford to lose momentum. David Harlan was next. The anonymous email I'd sent to his company had done its job. Within hours, whispers of an internal investigation circulated. My phone buzzed constantly as Charles fed me updates. Employees being questioned, HR digging through expense reports. When David finally received the call to meet with the board, I knew his time was up. They suspended him pending further review, a death sentence for a man who thrived on reputation and connections. Without the shield of his position, his enemies came out of the woodwork. Stories of harassment, of manipulating subordinates, of financial impropriety. Everything I'd sent them, and more, started pouring in. The scandal tore through the company like wildfire, and soon David was on the brink of losing everything. Yet it wasn't enough. I wanted him completely ruined, reduced to nothing more than a pariah. So I called the contact I'd made through Ethan's former associate, the one who had dirt on David's backroom deals. Using the information, I crafted a new package, detailing the bribes, the money laundering, the shell companies. I made sure it reached the right hands, the police, the IRS, and a few well-placed journalists hungry for a story that would dominate the front page. The morning after the news broke, David's house was raided. The footage played on every channel, agents hauling out boxes of documents, computers, his wife screaming at the cameras. David himself was handcuffed, his face pale, a sheen of sweat glistening on his forehead. They dragged him to the patrol car, and in that moment, I saw it. The look of a man who knew he'd lost everything. I leaned back, satisfaction and emptiness warring inside me. One more down, the web of destruction I'd woven was tightening around them all, and yet, a part of me hesitated. Lisa had to be suffering now, caught in the backlash. People would be asking questions about her role, her knowledge of David's actions. Her professional and personal circles were crumbling. I imagined her, desperate, trying to keep up appearances as the life she'd built disintegrated around her. I needed to see it for myself. That evening I drove by our house. No, her house now. It was dark, the curtains drawn. I parked a block away and waited. It took almost an hour, but then the front door opened and Lisa stepped out. She looked haggard, her hair pulled back into a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. She wore an oversized hoodie, the kind she used to lounge in on lazy Sundays. A pang of something, guilt, sympathy, I wasn't sure, flashed through me. I shook it off. This was her doing. She'd chosen this path. She glanced around as if expecting someone, then hurried to her car. I followed at a distance, keeping my headlights off. She drove aimlessly for a while, then finally pulled into a small parking lot outside a rundown diner. I watched her sit there, staring blankly at the dashboard, her shoulders slumped. My chest tightened. What was she thinking? Did she regret it? Was she scared? Before I could decide whether to approach her, my phone buzzed. It was Charles. Ryan, we have a problem, he said, his voice low and urgent. Lisa's been asking questions. She knows someone's been orchestrating all this. I think she's starting to put it together. I gripped the steering wheel. What do you mean? She's been talking to people, mutual contacts, trying to trace the leaks back. If she keeps digging, it won't take long for her to figure out it's you. My stomach clenched. Lisa was smart, and once she latched onto something, she wouldn't let go. If she uncovered my involvement, everything would unravel. My carefully laid plans, my control, it would all slip through my fingers. What does she want me to do? Charles asked. I looked back at Lisa's car. She was still sitting there, unmoving. Too little, too late, I thought bitterly. After everything I'd put in motion, she wanted to fight back. Now? Nothing, I said finally. Let her dig. It won't change anything. But I said, let her, I repeated, a harsh edge creeping into my voice. It's over, Charles. She can't undo what's been done. I hung up and watched Lisa for a few more minutes. She looked so small, so lost. For a fleeting moment, I felt a twinge of something like pity. Then I shoved it aside. She'd made her choices. Now she'd have to live with them. The next day, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Ethan Collins, the linchpin, the puppet master, was officially disbarred. The associate I'd worked with had leaked the damning evidence I'd given him to the Bar Association and the Department of Justice. The media picked up the story within hours, and Ethan's polished image shattered in front of the entire city. I watched the news coverage from the comfort of my motel room. His face filled the screen, a carefully composed mask of outrage and denial. He issued a statement, calling the allegations baseless, a smear campaign, but the reporters weren't buying it. Questions about his offshore accounts, his dealings with David, his involvement in Brad's schemes, they pummeled him relentlessly. And then, just like that, his facade crumbled. The camera caught it, the moment when his shoulders slumped, when the fight drained out of him. He muttered something to his lawyer, then turned and walked away, the cameras flashing wildly. It was done. They were all broken. Brad disgraced, David imprisoned, and Ethan ruined. And Lisa was alone, isolated, jobless. The perfect life she'd curated had been reduced to ashes. I should have felt triumphant, victorious. But as I sat there staring at the screen, all I felt was nothing. An emptiness that stretched out endlessly, swallowing the satisfaction I'd expected. The thrill of revenge had faded, replaced by a hollow void. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. I'd won. I'd destroyed them. So why did it feel like I'd lost something along the way? The answer hit me with brutal clarity, because revenge had consumed me, twisted me into something unrecognizable. I'd thought destroying them would heal the wounds they'd inflicted, but it hadn't. It had only left me with more scars. I glanced at my phone, thumb hovering over the contact labeled Lisa. I wanted to call her, to hear her voice, to see if there was anything left to salvage. But then I remembered her betrayal, her laughter with those men. I deleted the contact and tossed the phone onto the bed. No, there was nothing left. I'd scorched the earth behind me, and now there was no going back. The house felt eerily empty as I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing through the vacant rooms. I'd stripped it bare, removing every piece of furniture, every trace of warmth and life. The place where Lisa and I had built our life together was now just an empty shell, a perfect reflection of what we'd become. I made my way to the bedroom, the heart of the betrayal, and stood in the doorway. The air was thick with the memories of what I'd seen here. The images seared into my mind. Lisa, writhing in the sheets, her laughter mingling with the shadows of those men. My chest tightened as the fury swelled, but I forced it down. I needed to stay calm. This wasn't about anger anymore. I heard the soft creak of the front door opening and footsteps hesitantly crossing the threshold. My pulse quickened, but I didn't turn around. I kept my gaze fixed on the bed as if the truth of what happened there could somehow be erased by sheer will. Ryan? Her voice, so familiar yet distant, floated through the silence. I didn't respond, just waited. I could feel her presence behind me, the subtle shift of her weight as she hesitated. For a moment, the tension between us hung heavy, unspoken words and accusations lingering in the air. "Why did you want me to come here?" she asked finally, her voice trembling. I turned slowly, meeting her gaze. She looked different, thinner, pale, her eyes ringed with dark circles. The woman who stood before me was a shadow of the vibrant person she'd once been, and the sight of her like this stirred something unexpected inside me. Regret? No, pity, maybe, but it was too late for that. "Look around, Lisa," I said, my voice flat. "This is what's left." "This is all that's left." Her eyes flickered to the empty room, confusion etched across her face. "What do you mean?" "I mean everything's gone. Every piece of furniture, every picture frame, every reminder of what we had, because what we had wasn't real. It was all built on a lie." She flinched, her lips parting as if to protest, but no words came out. I watched her struggle, the truth weighing down on her like a physical burden. "Ryan, don't." I cut her off sharply, stepping closer. "You don't get to make excuses." "Not anymore." She closed her mouth, her gaze dropping to the floor. I could see her hands trembling, her shoulders slumping under the weight of it all. For a second, a flicker of doubt crossed my mind. Had I pushed too far, destroyed too much? But then I remembered everything she'd done, everything I'd witnessed. The betrayal, the lies, the way she'd looked at them with the kind of hunger and desperation she'd never shown me. The anger flared again, chasing away the doubt. "Why, Lisa?" I demanded, my voice low and tight. "Why did you do it?" She shook her head slowly, tears pooling in her eyes. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know how it started. I felt so lost, so disconnected. You were always gone, always wrapped up in your own world, your work, and I needed something. I needed to feel." "Needed to feel what?" I snapped. "Loved? Appreciated? Is that what it took? Letting them fuck you in our bed?" She recoiled as if I'd struck her, a sob escaping her lips. I watched her crumble, a mixture of satisfaction and guilt churning inside me. I wanted to hurt her, to make her feel the pain she'd caused me. But seeing her like this, shattered and broken, it didn't feel like I thought it would. "I'm sorry," she choked out, her voice barely audible. "I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I am. I'm so sorry, Ryan. I never wanted to hurt you." "Didn't you?" I took another step forward, closing the distance between us. "Because every time you brought them here, every time you spread your legs for them, you made a choice. You wanted it, Lisa. You wanted them." Her breath hitched, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, I didn't. Not like that. It wasn't what you think. They manipulated me, used me. Brad, he had something on me, something I couldn't let anyone find out. And David, he..." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice a harsh whisper. "Don't you dare try to make this about them. You're not a victim here. You could have told me. You could have come to me and explained, but you didn't. You chose them. You betrayed me." She shook her head frantically, desperation etched across her face. "I was scared, Ryan. I was so scared. You don't understand what it's like to feel trapped, to have no way out. I thought," her voice cracked, and she took a shuddering breath, "I thought I'd lose everything." I laughed bitterly. "Well, congratulations. You did." The silence that followed was suffocating. I could see the realization dawning on her, the truth settling in. She'd lost her job, her reputation, her family's support, and now she was losing whatever remained of her dignity. "I'm offering you a way out," I said quietly. "One last chance to walk away from this with something. But there's a condition." She looked up at me, hope flickering in her eyes despite everything. "What is it?" "Leave," I said simply. "Leave this city. Leave your family, your friends, everything. Start over somewhere new. And never, ever contact me again." Her face crumpled, another sob breaking free. "But where will I go? What will I do?" "That's not my problem, Lisa. You're resourceful. You'll figure it out." She stared at me, disbelief warring with resignation. I could see her weighing the options, considering the alternative. There was no going back, no fixing what was broken. This was her only way out, and she knew it. "Okay," she whispered finally. "I'll go. I'll leave." I nodded, a strange sense of relief washing over me. This was it, the end of our story. I'd gotten my revenge, torn her life apart piece by piece, and now I was setting her free. "Good," I murmured, stepping back. "Get your things and go. I'll be gone by the time you're back." She didn't move, just stood there staring at me as if trying to memorize my face, as if this was the last time she'd ever see me. Maybe it was. And then slowly she turned and walked out the door, her footsteps fading into the distance. I waited until I heard the front door close, then let out a long breath, my shoulders sagging. It was over. I'd won. So why did I feel so hollow? I glanced around the empty bedroom one last time, the emptiness mocking me. The bed where everything had shattered was still there, stripped of sheets and pillows, just a bare mattress on a frame. I walked over to it, reaching out to touch the cold surface, a surge of memories flooding back. Lisa's laughter, her moans, the whispered promises of love and loyalty, all lies. I tightened my grip on the mattress, feeling the anger simmer again. I thought revenge would be enough, that it would fill the void she'd left behind. But it hadn't. I was still empty, still broken. I'd destroyed her, but I destroyed myself in the process. I turned and left the house, the silence following me like a shadow. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows across the lawn. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the crisp evening air, letting it calm the storm inside me. Maybe this was how it was supposed to end. Maybe some wounds never healed, no matter how much blood was spilled. I'd severed the toxic connection between us, but in doing so, I'd lost a piece of myself too. I walked to my car and got in, gripping the steering wheel tightly. I'd watch her leave, make sure she was gone, and then what? Start over? Try to rebuild a life out of the ashes of what once was? I didn't know, but for the first time in months, I felt a sliver of something like hope, a tiny spark buried deep beneath the wreckage. Maybe that was enough. I started the engine and drove down the street, watching in the rearview mirror as Lisa's figure faded into the distance. I'd won. But in winning, I'd lost more than I'd ever imagined. And now there was nothing left to do but move forward, away from the past, away from her, away from everything I used to be. The sun dipped below the horizon as I pulled away from what used to be our house. My house now, though it felt like neither. It was just a structure, hollow and empty like me. As the tires crunched over gravel, the past blurred in the rearview mirror, reduced to a vague silhouette against the evening sky. I kept my eyes fixed ahead, gripping the steering wheel tighter, letting the emptiness wash over me. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to keep driving. The familiar streets melted into anonymous intersections. Stoplights blinked lazily, stores closed for the night. Everything felt muted, as if I were drifting through a fog. I'd won, destroyed Lisa, dismantled everything she'd built. But each victory had stripped away another layer of myself until I'd become a stranger. My phone buzzed beside me, breaking the silence. I glanced at the screen. Charles, I let it ring, the vibrating hum resonating in the quiet of the car. He'd want to talk, to debrief, but I didn't have the energy. Not for him, not for anyone. I pulled into a small park by the river, shutting off the engine. The water reflected the dim light of the street lamps, casting rippling shadows along the bank. I leaned back in my seat, staring at the dark current. Months ago, I would have been home right now, surrounded by a life I thought was real. Now there was nothing left. Nothing but me and this gnawing void. I thought back to Lisa's face when I told her to leave, how her eyes had widened with fear, then resignation. She hadn't argued, hadn't begged. Maybe part of her had known all along that it would come to this, a toxic dance that could only end in flames. And I'd let it. No, I'd fueled it, driven us both to this breaking point. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. Was it worth it? All the lies, the manipulations, the destruction? I tried to convince myself that it was, that she deserved everything I'd done. But the truth, the raw truth that gnawed at me, was that I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel anything at all. What kind of man destroys everything around him just to prove a point? I thought about my next steps, my mind flickering through options like a Rolodex of empty possibilities. Sell the house, liquidate the assets, disappear, move somewhere new where no one knew my name or the wreckage I'd left behind. But the idea of starting over felt exhausting. How could I rebuild when I barely recognized myself anymore? My phone buzzed again, this time a message. Charles, Ryan, it's done. Brad's agreed to go quietly. He won't mention Lisa. Harlan's facing charges. Ethan's career is over. You did it. Call me. I stared at the words, the finality of them. I did it. But the victory felt hollow, like holding ash in my hands. I hadn't just destroyed their lives. I destroyed mine too. Stripped it down to this barren state where I didn't know what came next. I typed a brief reply. Me, thanks. Need some time alone. I'll call you later. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and stepped out of the car, the cool breeze brushing against my skin. I walked to the edge of the river, the water lapping softly against the rocks. Somewhere across the darkness, lights twinkled, a life still going on, oblivious to the chaos I'd caused. Maybe that's what I needed, to leave this place where every street, every corner, was stained with memories of what once was. Lisa had been right about one thing. I'd always been absent, wrapped up in my own world, my own ambitions. And I'd ignored the cracks that formed between us, widening until they shattered everything. I kicked a rock into the river, watching it ripple the surface. I could go back to that life, to that version of myself who'd been too focused on success to see his own marriage unraveling. But there was no comfort in that thought, no solace in returning to who I used to be. Who was I now? The answer eluded me. But I knew I couldn't stay, not here in this place haunted by broken promises and lost trust. I needed to leave it all behind, the house, the memories, even the anger that had driven me to this point. I needed to let go. Back in the car, I scrolled through listings on my phone, cities far from here, places where I could blend in, start fresh. Denver, Seattle, Boston. I didn't know where I wanted to go, but I knew it had to be somewhere that didn't remind me of Lisa or the man I'd become. I found a listing for a loft in Portland, spacious, overlooking the water. Something about it appealed to me. I didn't need much. Just a place to sleep, a place to think. I saved the link, feeling the first flicker of direction in weeks. The drive home felt surreal, like I was gliding through a memory. I pulled into the driveway of the empty house, staring up at its dark, vacant windows. This place had been a monument to our marriage, a symbol of everything we'd built together. Now it was just a hollow structure, a reminder of what I'd lost. I walked inside, the echo of my footsteps the only sound. The rooms were stripped bare, the walls blank. I went upstairs to the bedroom, hesitating in the doorway. The bed frame was gone now, just an empty space where our life had unraveled. I stood there, the silence pressing in. Was this freedom? I'd imagined revenge would be liberating, that it would cleanse the poison Lisa had left in me. But all it had done was strip me down to a raw, exposed nerve. There was no sense of justice, no closure, just emptiness. I shook my head, turning away. No more looking back, no more regrets. It was time to move on. Downstairs, I gathered what little was left. Some clothes, a few personal items, nothing of sentimental value. The real estate agent would handle the rest. I loaded the bags into my car, then took one last look at the house, the place where it had all started, where it had all ended. I closed the door behind me and got in the car. This time I didn't look back as I drove away. 2 weeks later, I was settled in a new place, a small loft in Portland. It was sparse, barely furnished, but it was mine. The view overlooked the Willamette River, the water flowing steadily, indifferent to the turmoil of those who lived beside it. There was something calming about that, something I found myself staring at for hours. I'd left everything behind, sold the house, cut ties with the past. Even Charles, who'd tried calling a few more times, was left unanswered. He'd done his part. He deserved better than to be dragged down with me. I spent my days wandering the city, exploring its streets, its hidden corners. There was no purpose to my wandering, just a need to move, to keep going. I wasn't searching for anything. I wasn't running from anything. I was just existing. But slowly, bit by bit, the numbness began to recede. I started to notice things again, the way the sunlight filtered through the trees in the park, the scent of coffee from a small cafe I passed each morning. I caught myself smiling at a joke a stranger made in line. These tiny moments felt fragile, like delicate threads trying to weave something new out of the broken pieces. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my loft, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a strange sensation, something unfamiliar, yet welcome. It wasn't joy exactly, but it wasn't the bleak emptiness either. It was something in between, a sense of possibility. For the first time in months, I considered what came next, not just surviving, but actually living. Building something new. It wouldn't be easy. The scars Lisa left would always be there, etched deep into my soul. But maybe that was okay. Maybe they didn't have to define me. I took a deep breath, the cool evening air filling my lungs. I'd lost so much, my marriage, my sense of self, but I hadn't lost everything. There was still a future out there, unwritten and uncertain, and that uncertainty felt liberating. I turned away from the balcony, closing the door behind me. Inside, the loft was quiet, shadows pooling in the corners. I glanced around, the emptiness no longer daunting. It was a blank canvas, a place to start over. I'd been consumed by revenge, but in the process, I'd freed myself from the illusions I'd clung to. The man who'd been betrayed, the husband who'd sought vengeance, those were chapters in a book that was finally closing. I packed a small suitcase, threw in some clothes, and grabbed my car keys. I didn't know where I was going, maybe a drive up the coast, maybe somewhere new. It didn't matter. For the first time, I wasn't running away or chasing something. I was just moving forward. The engine roared to life as I pulled onto the road, the city lights fading in the rearview mirror. I felt a faint smile tug at my lips. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to navigate. No more ghosts of the past, no more Lisa, just me. And for now, that was enough.